welcome everybody. Good morning, and welcome you too. Thank you for joining us. So the last 2 days we discussed or explored the topics of study and meditation. As I mentioned the first day, traditionally study, meditation, and service are said to be the 3 pillars of the theosophical practice. There are a few more elements that are always implicit in the theosophical literature, in the practice, that we are going to see in the next days. But today this morning, let us explore the idea of service from a theosophical point of view. Again, as you are going to see, in general, these ideas of service or meditation or study in theosophical literature, there is like a deeper view, not study merely as accumulating information, not meditation merely as a relaxation practice. Service also has a deeper dimension that is mentioned in the theosophical literature, and that's what we are going to explore this morning.
Foundations. It is a fundamental doctrine of theosophy that the separateness which we feel between ourselves and the world of living beings around us is an illusion, not a reality. In very deed and truth, all men are one, not in a feeling of sentimental gush and hysterical enthusiasm, but in sober earnest. As all Eastern philosophy teaches, there is but one self in all the infinite universe, and what we call self is but the illusionary reflection of the one self in the heaving waters on earth. True occultism is the destruction of the false idea of self, and therefore true spiritual perfection and knowledge are nothing else but the complete identification of our finite selves with the great all. It follows, therefore, that no spiritual progress at all is possible except by and through the bulk of humanity. It is only when the whole of humanity has attained happiness that the individual can hope to become permanently happy. For the individual is an inseparable part of the whole. H.P. Blavatsky.
So this last sentence is quite radical. What H.P. is saying there is no individual liberation. There is no individual permanent happiness, because there are no individuals. The idea of being an individual is an illusion, is a mistake. It's something that we as the one self, all of us are the one self having different experiences in different bodies. So each one of us is an experience of what we really are. It's like, again, with using the example of the hand. If you touch two of your fingers, you may be paying attention to the thumb, for example, and then you identify with the thumb, and then you feel the other finger. If you switch your identification, if you concentrate on the other finger, then you feel the thumb. And both are you. So depending on where you pay attention is what it becomes yourself, and the other becomes the non-self. So it is the same with the universal self. The universal self in me is focusing on this thing that we call Pablo. The universal self in each of you is focusing on what you call yourself. But we are the universal self. We are none of these individuals. And the reason why we are constantly seeking for something else, in any realm, is because we keep identifying ourselves with a fragment, and we know we are not the fragment. The fragment will never be satisfying. So some philosophers wondered, like Schopenhauer, for example, Western philosopher, he said there must be something wrong in life, because if life was okay, we wouldn't need to be constantly seeking for something to make sense out of life. We would be fine with just being, but we are constantly seeking for more. And whatever we are, seeking for more, as a materialistic person, more possessions. As an artist, more forms of expression. As a scientist, for more knowledge. Why are we always looking for more? There is obviously an intrinsic lack in what we are. That's what we would say, what he would say, and that is perfectly true. As long as we are identified with the fragment, we can never be satisfied. And from this radical truth that we are one, then comes, as a consequence, the idea that the liberation and the happiness has to be for the whole of humanity, for each one of the fragments, before we as the whole can come back to a state of true self or true happiness. And that is why service is an intrinsic part of the theosophical view. There is no room for the idea of personal salvation, me going to heaven, me going to nirvana, me attaining liberation. In the theosophical view, all those concepts are kind of a mistake, in the sense that whoever is seeking for personal salvation may get to a place of spiritual suspension, so to say, that may look like a liberation, but is a kind of fake liberation. That all that happens with that soul that is trying to isolate itself from the rest and from the world is that it falls into a frozen state where there is no suffering, but there is nothing else either. And then when the process of evolution continues and a new cycle begins, that soul will be dragged again to evolution, and it will be in while the soul was in this frozen state, the whole of humanity kept on evolving. So when the soul comes back, it will be behind those who kept on evolving. So in the theosophical view, the idea of trying to attain personal liberation is a mistake, and it's not really possible. This is a complex subject, but I just wanted to point out, because we see in some traditions the idea that you can attain moksha by yourself, but is, according to the theosophical view, is not a true moksha. This idea of attaining moksha or liberation by yourself is based on the idea that we are all independent purushas. Purusha is the Sanskrit word for spirit. So in Sankhya, for example, there is the idea that we all are independent purushas. And therefore, if you are independent and you are eternal, you have your own individual self, liberation would be possible. This is precisely what the Buddha came to correct when he says there is no Atman, no eternal Atman. The word Atman in Sanskrit just means self. And he was referring to this particular doctrine, the idea that we have our individual eternal self. The concept of Atman in theosophy, if you read Blavatsky's definition, is always Atman is the universal self. I don't have my Atman, you don't have your Atman. What I have, if we put it that way, is my reflection of Atman. Is the reflection, as she says there, is the universal self shining upon this group of vehicles of consciousness. Then it is reflected here, and that reflection, I can say, is myself, but it's just a reflection.
There are a couple practical examples. The air in our lungs. We wouldn't say the air in our lungs is my air. It's still the universal air. We just don't take hold of it like we do our personality. And the same with a sponge. If a sponge is in the water, we don't call the water in the sponge is water. It's still water from the universal.
Yeah, when you describe a human body, you describe, it has a head, it has lungs, it has this, but you don't say it has air. Air is not part of the human body. In the same way, Atman is the foundation for the whole universe, this table as much as myself. and it's not a property of myself, my Atman. In one conversation in the Blavatsky Lodge, when Blavatsky was alive, she asked, "Who do you think you are?" So a member said, "I am Atman." And Blavatsky said, "What are you talking about? You've got no Atman. That idea of your Atman is the basis for selfishness, and it's terrible," she said. In that way, she sounded very much like the Buddha. That doesn't mean that there is no Atman. It means there is no eternal individual Atman. So this is the foundation why service is the natural consequence of all of us being just one.
The seeker must cease from evil ways. This step taken, he must become active in well-doing. No negative goodness suffices for him who would be a knower of the self. As ill-doing accents and strengthens the sense of separateness, so does well-doing accent and strengthen the sense of unity. Only as the seeker engages in the service of others, seeks their good, considers their interests, yokes his strength to theirs, will there begin to dawn in him that right discrimination, viveka, which is the first qualification for those who enter the road which leads to the path. Annie Besant.
There is one Mahatma letter where the master says there are hundreds of thousands of sadhus and people who go to the forest in India who live the purest of all lives, and yet being on the path of error as they are, they will never learn about us, about the masters. So the master says that going into the forest, even if you have the purest of all lives, that is the path of error. So why is this? I think Annie Besant here gives us a hint. It is not enough to cease doing wrong things. It is not enough to purify your nature. It is not enough to to work on yourself. You can isolate yourself and then be perfect. Much more is needed for the realization of the ultimate reality. We need to become active forces, beneficent forces for the evolution of the whole. The ceasing from evil is a negative purity, negative in the sense of passive. We need also to be active if we are going to realize the universal self. And this is the reason why service is an essential part of the theosophical view.
Our ideal of love being a perfect union with the all by an utter abnegation of the self and by ardent, sleepless endeavors for the good of all sentient beings, even the brute creation. Damodar Madalankar. Our philosophy teaches us that the object of doing our duties to all men and to ourselves, the last, is not the attainment of personal happiness, but of the happiness of others, the fulfillment of right for the sake of right, not for what it may bring us. Happiness, or rather contentment, may indeed follow the performance of duty, but is not and must not be the motive for it. HPD.
So true service is a service that is based on being concerned about the others, not about ourselves. To get there, it already requires a lot of work, because I remember Krishnamurti saying, for example, never do anything to be happy. First be happy and then do anything. Mm-hmm. But we work the other way. We do things as means to be happy. And therefore, when we act in that way, everything becomes self-centered. Everything becomes a means to produce a certain state in myself. Relationships, a job, any action, then we start again judging things based on whether they are agreeable to me, whether I like them, whether I feel happy doing things, then I do them, or if they are unpleasant, then I don't do them. So an important aspect of the spiritual practice is to be able to transcend the causes of suffering, which in the theosophical view is very plain, as we've said several times. The cause of suffering is the wrong idea that I'm a separate being. So all the work in the spiritual path, from a theosophical point of view, is to try to transcend that view, to discover what we really are, because only then the concern about myself begins to weaken naturally. And then true service may begin. So by this I don't mean that we should try first to transcend the self and then help others. This is, we need to clean the boat as we are sailing. It's not that we have to first try to be perfect in order to help. But it is a cycle. And the more, as we are going to see, the very act of service helps us transcend the lower self too. But we are going to see that. But the point here is the ideal in service is the persons or animal or environment or whatever it is that the object of the service is to produce welfare in others, not in ourselves. And as Blavatsky says there, obviously, because we are all one, when you serve, there is certain sense of happiness or joy or contentment. And that is perfectly fine. But that should not be why we do the service.
Spiritual service. It is not violence that can ever ensure bread and comfort for all, nor is it the kingdom of peace and love, of mutual help and charity and food for all, to be conquered by a cold, reasoning, diplomatic policy. It is only by the close, brotherly union of men's inner selves, of soul solidarity, that the reign of justice and equality for all can ever be inaugurated. This is the first of the three fundamental objects for which the Theosophical Society was established, HPD.
So here Blavatsky is talking about something very concrete. How are we going to attain these aims that many organizations, the UN, the governments, they claim they want to attain? The kingdom of peace and love, having food for all, having this solidarity. How are we going to attain that in humanity? We are painfully aware of the conflicts that are there in the world. So what is the solution for that? We have tried many things in the past, in all our history. We have tried revolutions. We have tried violence, trying to, change governments or change ways of governance. We have tried also diplomacy, the politicians and what they are trying to do, in the UN. We have tried all these means, and the world is still as chaotic, basically, as it always was. So Blavatsky says, this is the wrong direction. It's not by these means that the problems in the world are going to be solved. We may spend a lot of energy there, but these activities are addressing always the symptom and not the cause. Sometimes they are necessary. If you suddenly begin to bleed, you may need to first try to stop the bleeding. But then you need to try to address the root problem. Why did you begin to bleed? So the same with the problems in humanity. Many times some form of action, political or social, they are necessary, but they will never solve the problem. They may keep humanity going as a sick humanity, but they will never heal humanity. So Blavatsky says the way to heal humanity humanity will be healed when more and more people can recognize this union that is the essential feature of our inner selves. So how are we going to do that? Of course, most humanity at this point are not really even interested in this. There are a few people in humanity around the world that may be interested, and we are part of those people. So all we can do at the moment is to try to make this a reality in ourselves. The more we can make this a reality in ourselves, the more that perception will spread in humanity. So, as you know, not only Gandhi but many others said, we have to be the change that we want to see in the world. That is a theosophical principle, and that is the direction to solve the human problems.
The theosophical ideas of charity mean personal exertion for others, personal mercy and kindness, personal interest in the welfare of those who suffer, personal sympathy, forethought, and assistance in their troubles or needs. We theosophists do not believe in giving money. And B?
Nota bene.
If we had it, through other people's hands or organizations. We believe in giving to the money 1,000-fold greater power and effectiveness by our personal contact and sympathy with those who need it. We believe in relieving the starvation of the soul as much, if not more, than the emptiness of the stomach. For gratitude does more good to the man who feels it than to him for whom it is felt. HPB.
Because we are so identified with our physical nature, when we think in terms of service, we naturally think that service is whatever you can do on the physical plane. And again, that is a level of service that is important. Annie Besant founded the Theosophical Order of Service, and the TOS does a great work, you know, in trying to help on the physical level. Also, the TOS transcends the idea of mere assistentialism, and also it has departments to help in the education of people. Because as Blavatsky says here, there are more levels than the physical level of service. Nourishing the body, again, it is necessary, but we will never solve the problem of hunger in the world by feeding those who are hungry. Because we have in the world already everything we need so that everybody could have enough food. The problem is not that we don't have enough food, that we need to generate more food. The problem is in the hearts and minds of people that produce this distribution of wealth that is so uneven. So the real problem is in the hearts of people. So how are we going to solve the problem? We can feed generation after generations of people, and the problem will still be there. By that I don't mean we don't need to help those who are hungry. We do need, but far more is needed to solve the problem. Again, feeding the hungry is just working with the symptoms. If we want this at some point to be solved, we have to do something that goes to the cause. And this is what Blavatsky was talking about there. We need to nurture the soul of people. It is only when people's hearts and minds change that the world will change. So the work that the Theosophical Society does in trying to help people to understand life in a different way, to realize all this truth, that is a piece of service that is going to the core of the problem of humanity. But at the same time, we have to realize that this is our true work as Theosophical Society. If we become the center of spiritual entertainment, if our talks are just because they are interesting, or this is you feel good, or then we are not doing our service. Our talks should always be geared towards helping people and ourselves to transform their lives and to transform our lives. So when we organize a talk, we should ask ourselves, is this trying to go to the source of the problem? Or are we talking about this just to entertain people, just because it is interesting?
And at the same time, not all of us have part in organizing talks, but we do take part in what we listen to, what we study, how we go about things. So the same thing we can ask ourselves is, are we studying to just gather more knowledge or gather more intellect, or are we studying as a jumping off point to help others do what we are trying to do, feed our souls?
Yes, at the feet of the Master says, study, but study first those things that can help you help others. And of course, we have to take this in a wide sense. As we mentioned when we were talking about studying the secret doctrine in the right way is a very practical thing, because it's beginning to awaken our spiritual mind, the higher mind. So if you think study whatever helps you study others, that doesn't mean that then we should study only things that produce an immediate result from a superficial point of view. That means that we need to promote in our lodges, in our national sections, in our own lives, a study that can produce this radical transformation, first of perspective of life, and then this transformation that we have been talking about.
And studying the secret doctrine, I'm going to jump in here a minute, doesn't mean, if you're not at the place to study the secret doctrine, that's fine. I've been involved in theosophy for about 10 years, and Pablo says I'm still such a youngster, that when he goes to conferences in
that's
Argentina,
not what I think, that's how
when
normally
you go in
people
Argentina,
see.
they separate new theosophists from old by 20 years. So jumping right into the secret doctrine, because of its very particular needs or very particular ways of helping us, there's a lot to do to study up to the secret doctrine until we can get
Yes,
there.
I mentioned the secret doctrine as like the extreme example.
Right. Yeah.
Even studying the secret doctrine that is so abstract is a form of service if we do it in the way that we were talking about and with the intention that we were talking about. If you study the secret doctrine because you want to have the prestige within the TS of being a person that knows the secret doctrine, that is useless and that is counterproductive. But the point is that we should try to think of the activities we do in terms of service and say, why are we organizing this activity? How do we think this will help humanity? Or are we giving this talk just because we give a talk every week and we have to fill the spot? Or are we giving this talk because, well, people are interested in this, everybody's interested in this, superficial stuff, and people will come to the TS and we give the talk. I think we have to be serious in that sense.
Self-transformation and service. As each student lives a better life, and by his example imprints upon the astral light the picture of a higher aspiration acted in the world, he thus aids souls of advanced development to descend from other spheres, where the cycles are so dark that they can no longer stay there. HPB.
In Theosophy, there is this idea that souls incarnate whenever there is something that they can learn. So, for example, the more advanced souls, they don't incarnate at the beginning of human evolution because they already went through that. If you think of the process of evolution as being in different, the process of evolution as being different grades in school. You have the idea of first graders, second graders. So you wouldn't send a kid that already went through first, second, or third grade to go back to one of those. They simply would waste their time. So there are many souls that are in a stage of evolution that the current situation in life, in our culture, can offer nothing to them. So they are not incarnated. Some of them are incarnated because they incarnate for the purpose of service. But there is a bulk of souls that they don't. Or they incarnate every now and then. So what Blavatsky says is that as we transform ourselves, because we are all one, we transform the consciousness of humanity, and the more we can do that, then the conditions begin to be such that more advanced souls may incarnate. And that is also part of what was intended with the Theosophical Society and with other serious spiritual organizations, is to generate a bubble where souls of a certain kind that would not be able to develop much in the traditional religion, for example. It's a bubble where souls can come and learn what they need at this point, that otherwise an incarnation in a regular religion would be useless for them, for example. So in the world there are little bubbles that are set up so that these souls can incarnate. This with no sense of elitism, elitism? It's not an elitist sense. It is a natural, we don't say that universities are elitist because they don't accept high school kids. There is a natural process where we are all valuable, no matter where we are, but we all have different needs. So some souls have different needs than what regular religions can offer. And if in the world there are not these organizations, they don't have a place to develop. So the TS has to keep the seriousness of the approach, because if in our attempt to become more massive, we water down our approach, we start saying what people want to hear, then we are putting down a possibility for those souls that need a more serious approach. We are closing down a place where they could come and learn. So it is a very serious responsibility that we have. We did not found the Theosophical Society. This was something that was founded by people who had the vision. But we have the responsibility not to degenerate the effort. There is a reason why the TS has this particular approach. It's not the best, it's not the worst, it's not the only one. It is a particular approach that we have to keep, because it is meant for these souls that need to learn what they need to learn through the TS.
And I was just going to add, by us doing our job and making the ground more compatible for these greater souls, it's helping us in the long run. Then we'll have more energy, more people to feed on. It's just like a sports team. A sports team, you can't get better until you can recruit better athletes, but you can't recruit better athletes until you're a better team. So it's one of these cycle things that, so we have to work, and I believe a lot of the work of the TS is from an energy standpoint, and our lack of trust in this energy or in the founders or in the essence of the TS, and thinking from our personal selves that, well, this doesn't work in the physical world, I think we lose a lot of the potential that's out there.
Yes, in the Hindu tradition there is this idea of the ages, and we are in the Kali Yuga, which is a dark age, an age in which selfishness, competition, those are the means to survive in the world. And I think when the TS was founded, as we discussed when talking about the work of the TS in one of the afternoons, the TS was founded to generate this little bubble in which we can try into developing and relating ourselves or with each other like in the Satya Yuga, like in a spiritual age. So within the dark age, we generate a bubble where we try to learn how to live in a bright age. So if within the TS we keep repeating what the Kali Yuga is doing, then the TS is not different and is not serving its purpose, this very deep aspect of service. So if in the TS we are at least trying to relate in ways that are not the ways of the world, that very trying is opening up the TS to be this important piece of service in humanity.
What we are expresses itself in our various vehicles, and they are constantly pouring out waves of influence which tend to reproduce themselves. That is, to infect other people. So whatever we wish other people to be, we ourselves must be first of all. C.W. Leadbeater. He is making an effort to control his irritability when he controls the wave of anger. He radiates instead calming and soothing influences which are distinctly helpful to all those near him who are engaged in the same struggle. Leadbeater.
So because we are not islands, because we are not really separate individuals, we all are affecting each other. We affect each other by what we are, far more than by what we do and what we say. What we do, we may do it now and not then, it's now and then that we act. What we say also, we may be saying something now but not later. But what we are is always there. What we are is a constant influence in the world. So what we, if we can make people around us worse or better by the influence of what we are. So an important aspect of service is to transform the only part in the universe that we can transform in a direct way, that is ourselves. But by transforming ourselves, indirectly, we are helping the transformation of humanity around. So this is a spiritual aspect of service. This is why we should work seriously in our spiritual development. Again, not because we want to attain enlightenment or we want to attain this or that, but because we recognize that the suffering that is in the world is my suffering, and my suffering is the suffering of the world. And the reason why I have to be different is because only then the whole world can be closer to be different. So when we have this ideal, it is far easier to go through the challenges and struggles and difficulties in the spiritual life. If we go to the spiritual life because we want to attain happiness, with the first difficulty we will drop it because what we want is happiness. So when we face non-happiness, we say, okay, this doesn't work. I'll go and search and try in a different way. So if our aim is personal, at some point we will lose the inspiration. At some point we will be disappointed and drop it. But if our ideal is the welfare of humanity, then no difficulty, no challenge will dent that inspiration. On the contrary, you will gain the strength because you know you are doing this not for your little self, you are doing this for humanity. So that is the true ideal of the theosophical approach. And let me say something more. If you see in the second example by Leadbeater, even your attempt at, not giving into sadness or anger or jealousy or whatever negative emotion, your very attempt at not giving into this begins to activate certain forces, the forces that you need to maintain your poise, that those forces spread around, and anybody that is trying to do the same, they can be fed by those forces that you generate. In the spiritual world, in the physical world, using something makes that something cease, disappear. Because of the conditions of the physical world, if I use something, then I am depriving some other person from using it, or I am just, wasting it in the sense that it is not being reproduced by using it. But on the spiritual worlds, the more we use something, the more we reproduce it. So the happier you are not taking happiness from other people. You are actually reproducing happiness. On the contrary, the more money you have, the less money somebody else has. So there is a difference with the physical and the spiritual world. So when you are trying to control, for example, your anger, that very use of energy to maintain your poise is generating that kind of energy so that others have it available.
And that's even if you succeed at controlling your anger or your irritability or your jealousy. It's not just that I have to succeed at controlling my anger in order to produce an effect. As long as I'm aware and I'm trying, that adds to the energy.
Yeah, it's all a question, as Michelle said, of energy. The energy of a particular emotion may have, let me use scientific language. Let's say it has 10 units of anger energy, and you may require 10 units of calming energy to control it. But at this point, you may not be able to produce or to resort to these 10 units. So you can only get 5. That means that you are not going to be successful in controlling the anger. But those 5 units that you did use by your trying, even if you failed, those are being reproduced for others and for yourself. So it's not a question of whether you succeed, it is a question of whether you tried. That's why in the Mahatma letters, one of the masters is constantly saying, try, blah, 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 try. It's not saying accomplish, win, conquer. It's saying try. All we have to do is try, because that is the way that we generate the better possibilities for us and the rest.
Possessing this tremendous power, we must be careful how we exercise it. We must remember to think of a person as we wish him to be, for the image that we thus make of him will naturally act powerfully upon him, and tend to draw him gradually into harmony with itself. Let us fix our thoughts upon the good qualities of our friends, because in thinking of any quality, we tend to strengthen its vibrations and therefore to intensify it. And this is a lot harder than it seems, than it sounds here.
Yeah, if we can visualize ourselves as being constantly shooting off energy, and wherever we direct our attention, then there is a channel of energy there. And we cannot prevent it. This is why Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, he's talking about inaction. He said it's impossible not to act. Even if you decide to be sitting there, you are acting. We are constantly acting with what we are. Action is far more than physical motion or than physical words. What we are is constantly acting. So these energies go out and help or hinder other people or situations or organizations. And Bess and Levira and Blavatsky, they always talked very strongly against gossiping, against criticizing, because they said that is a very mean thing to do, because with the power of our thoughts, we are really making it heavier for the person or the situation to change. And of course, changing our tendency to gossip is not a small, feat. It's something that requires a lot of work, a lot of spiritual effort and understanding and love. So that is an important part of our work.
And it's not just gossiping, but it's also mentioning something. I think it's Krishnamurti who said a friend of his was coming into the room and said, "Oh, did you hear about?" Not to gossip, but, "Oh, I feel sorry for this poor fellow." And Krishnamurti stopped him right there and he said, "You can't even do that. You can't even, there's no reason to bring this up or to mention this." And at first that's really hard to do because, okay, you can't gossip, you can't, criticize. Now you can't even mention someone and say, "Oh, this poor fellow." That leaves out a lot of conversation. And our mind,
the
we
weather,
always have the weather.
The weather is the only thing. Yeah. Or we remain silent. There is a reason why wise people tend to be quiet.
And I've noticed that as the process of life has gone on, at first we know this in theory, but then when we're sitting there talking to someone, our mind is going. I feel like it's a Rolodex. My mind's looking for something to say about somebody. And I can't talk about that. Oh, can't talk about that. Oh. And you do. We sit in silence a lot more, or I sit in silence a lot more than I used to.
Like everything, we can't change a tendency all of a sudden. And also at the beginning, it is a struggle. And then eventually it becomes part of who you are. So this is always in any aspect of the spiritual life. At the beginning you say, how am I going to do this? Well, there are several stages. At the beginning you don't even want to do it, because you know in your mind that you shouldn't do this, but your emotions still want to do it. So when you look at what you feel like doing, you feel that you want to do it, and it's your mind that is telling you you shouldn't do it. And that generates a lot of inner conflict. We need to learn how to work with this with no guilt or conflict. We need to understand these are natural processes. But as we keep, at least we can recognize, okay, at the emotional level, I just don't feel like, stop doing this, but I can recognize intellectually that I should. And you leave it there. Be honest. This is the situation right now. That recognition, little by little, will start giving more strength to your intellectual view and less to the emotional reaction. So in the second stage, you understand this and you want not to do this, and still you cannot prevent it. That is a second stage. In the first stage, you don't even want to do it. When you are angry and somebody tells you you shouldn't be angry, you want to be angry, because that is the first stage. There is a second stage that you are angry and you don't want to be angry, but you cannot, prevent it. That is a second stage in which the identification with the emotions is far weaker. And then there will come a third stage where you have the ability to, even if the emotion of anger is there, you can remain poised and watch it. And then the fourth stage is that the emotion of anger becomes so weak that it just comes up, you watch it, and it disappears. So there are natural stages of growth, and they all come naturally with the earnest effort. We are going to see all that later.
And going back from anger to the gossiping or talking about others, we can get to that point. Like, I can get to that point right now in my conversations with Pablo. We very rarely, will go off on that tangent. But then, so once you get to that fourth stage, life throws at you some little obstacles for you to overcome and puts you in situations with people who don't know that gossiping or commenting or feeling sorry for somebody isn't where you want to be. So you're constantly having to figure out how to say, I don't want to talk about that. We shouldn't go there. It's not nice to, gossip. So,
of course, if there is a problem and you think that you need to solve it, sometimes it's not our place to try to solve a problem, but sometimes it is. So it doesn't mean that you cannot deal with the problems. It doesn't mean that you have to run away from the problems. But with, honesty and trying to work on this, little by little you see the difference between trying to deal with the problem, and sometimes you have to talk about, what people are doing or situations because you want to solve the problem, and the other attitude that is just, the gossipy attitude.
A man occupied in the earnest study of higher things is for the time lifted entirely out of himself and generates a powerful thought form in the mental world, which is immediately employed as a channel by the force hovering in the world or plane next above. When a body of men join together in a thought of this nature, the channel which they make is out of all proportions larger in its capacity with the sum of their separate channels. Such a body of men, therefore, is an inestimable blessing to the community amidst which it works. Jeffrey Hudson.
At the beginning of the TS, this was very present in many members, that the lodge itself was preparing the mind of humanity to accept all these truths. And I remember talking with older members, and some of you may have experienced this, that like in the 70s, the idea of vegetarianism or karma, reincarnation was, the 60s, 70s was really unusual. And the members had to struggle a lot about many of these things that today are very common. And this is something that theosophical leaders said from the very beginning. With the study of the lodges, all these ideas are planted in the human mind. And because most people are not really aware of their thoughts, they think whatever common influence is there. So most of the influence is in the direction of criticism and jealousy and selfishness. But if we can generate enough thought forms on the other of a different kind, in the same more or less unconscious way, people will start repeating those things. And that is how, we in humanity, we are at all different stages of growth. And there is a stage of growth in which you are unconscious of your thoughts and you will just repeat whatever is in the environment. Then at some point, you start realizing that you need to be aware of your thoughts. But for that part of humanity that is not very aware of the thoughts, and again, this with no judgmental way, not in a judgmental way, but that part of humanity can benefit a lot from all these kind of things that we do in the TS. And it is because of that the door is open for them to conceive life in this particular way. So that is another important piece of service that we do in the TS.
Right, and within our lodges itself, there was a study done about groups. And they say when men get together in a group, they usually knock out the weakest link. So they try to weed out those that don't fit their high standards. When women get together, they usually knock out the strongest link out of jealousy. So as women, we're constantly weakening our groups, and as men, we think we're strengthening it, but it's those other links that we're not paying attention to or that we think are useless. Those are the links that come up with an idea or a concept or can add to the positiveness of the group if we can remember those things when we get together.
Yeah, so in our lodges, that's why the idea of brotherhood in the lodges, we should try to act in a different way. Always try to be aware what tendencies that we bring from the world are getting in the way of how we relate in the lodges. And if when we study in the lodges, we study in a serious way, again, study something that we think will help us transform ourselves and therefore help humanity, then we become a source of good influence in the world. If in the lodges we are doing a superficial work that is mainly because we like each other and we come together, we talk about some interesting thing, we have a good time and go back home, that is nice, but it's not we are not doing any particular piece of service because we are just reproducing a nice time with our friends, which is perfectly fine. But I wouldn't say that we are doing a specific service for the world. So there is time, of course, for being with friends and having social time, but also in the TS we should try to make sure that the lodges also become forces to help humanity in this way.
Truly the help of the Holy Ones is given chiefly upon higher planes, but it acts in the physical world as well, if we give it the opportunity. The Master will not waste his strength in forcing a stream of his energy down into the dense matter of this lower world, because to do that would not be good spiritual economics. But if a man already living in our lower world so arranges his life as to make himself a fit channel for that energy, it becomes worth the Master's while. If he does this, if he lives in this way, the powers who rule the world will soon recognize him and use him, for by living thus, he makes himself a ready channel for the power of the Master, a valuable instrument in his hands. Letter.
So the idea is that, as Michelle is going to talk about in her talk,
Be careful.
Tomorrow, Tuesday.
He always says it and then he gives half my talk away.
The masters work mainly on the higher planes. That's their work, because on those planes the energy they use is more effective. The higher you go into the planes, the closer you are to the root of the problems. So the masters work at the root of the problem, which is the level of the soul, trying to help the souls grow. And if they use their energy and time and effort to try to produce results on the physical plane, a lot of energy is wasted by the very nature of the physical plane. It's like if you have a lake and you try to send a ray of light through the lake, the further it goes, the dimmer the light is. So the same with the energy. Unless there are people who can generate like a kind of glass tube so that the light can go and without being dimmed. So that is what
Disperse.
Yeah, and then disperse. So that is what a serious person that is trying to be as spiritual as he or she can become a channel for those forces if we begin to put our nature in tune with the nature of the masters to whatever degree that we can. Of course, the masters are far beyond what we are at the moment, but there are octaves. So if we are in our little measure doing the same effort that the masters are doing, we become in rapport, in tune with them, and then they can start using us as centers to spread their influence, so that their energy is not wasted because we afford this kind of tube, so to say, through which the energy can come without being wasted.
Or like a lightning rod.
Yes.
To gather that energy and then we disperse it here on the physical plane.
So the masters are always looking for channels for their energy. And when I say channel, I'm not talking about this channeling of different entities. That's a completely different subject. Channel of energy, I mean, is something that you don't even notice it, but you become a source of beneficent force for humanity, more than you could by yourself. So this is also a very important piece of service that Theosophists may aspire to.
It's like, you guys know the movie Star Wars? That's the force that they're asking Luke Skywalker to tap into, that little similar.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll hear that again Tuesday night in my talk. Whenever we pour out from ourselves love or devotion, which is utterly without thought of self, we produce results which lie far beyond our ken. All affection or devotion that has in it the least thought of self sends its force in closed curves which return upon those who generated it. But when self has been absolutely forgotten, an effect far transcending any imagination of ours is produced. For that open curve reaches up to the solar deity himself, and it is from him that the response comes. It also, at the same time, pours spiritual force into the great reservoir of the adepts. So it comes to pass that every thought which has no slightest taint of self in it is a thought which directly helps the world. Leadbeater.
This is the foundation of how karma works. Whenever an action comes from a personal center, that personal center is tied to the action and will attract the effects back to that center. If we act without acting based on personal desires, then that action is not really produced by a personal center. So that action goes, and the effect can be enjoyed by the whole humanity. So let's say if it is a good action, and we do a good action with selfish ends, we will get a good karma at some level because the action was good, and that will make us happy for a moment. But the very fact that we are still self-centered produces other causes for suffering. But if we do a good action without any thought of self, that good action is not going to come back to us. It's really and truly an offering for humanity. And of course, the very fact of acting without thinking of the self is helping that person. But if we start thinking about that and doing good actions without thinking about ourselves so that we can benefit ourselves, you see the trick. But when we do actions without thinking of ourselves, it's a true gift for humanity. And as the Leader says there, it can even reach the deity and generate a response. And that is the esoteric foundation behind the idea of atonement and sacrifice for others, is that when you do something without the self, it really doesn't come back to you, but really helps others. Okay, and go to the next, because we have, let's, the last part of this is that trying to keep the idea of service in mind is itself a spiritual practice for us.
Every student of occultism knows the acquisition of Brahma Vidya, divine wisdom, is dependent entirely upon the development of a feeling of universal love in the mind of the aspirant. A cultivation of the feeling of unselfish philanthropy is the path which has to be traversed. For it is that alone which will lead to universal love, the realization of which constitutes the progress towards deliverance from the chains forged by Maya, illusion. Damodar.
So the idea is that only by means of helping others we can evolve. And when we help others, that in itself is serving as part of our spiritual practice and evolution. I wanted to mention this at the end because it is a fact. It is a fact that the helping others is really helping ourselves. But again, that should not be the motive why we are helping others. If we help others because we know that we are growing out of it, then we are not really helping others. The motivation came back to the self-centeredness. But it is a fact that by helping others, actually according to Damodar and other theosophies, it is only by helping others that we can really evolve. As long as the problem with study, meditation, self-purification, all these things, is that they can become self-centered. They can all be done because of my own progress. And when that is the case, as I said in previous sessions, that very motivation will set the boundary as to how far you can go, because we are still clinging to the idea of self, of a separate self. It is only service, the true attempt at benefiting others, that can maintain the spiritual practice or prevent the spiritual practice from becoming self-centered, and therefore open the door for a true realization. So the very act of being aware of being a force of service in all little things, if the chair is in front of the door, be aware and you can remove the chair. In whatever, in little things in life, the very state of consciousness of trying to see what is needed is what will open the door for spiritual growth.
And discrimination is one of the characteristics for discipleship. And that discrimination is, part of it is to discriminate where we're needed to help. So we don't have to look like Pablo started, we don't have to look far away. It can be that service to our children or to our parents or to our family members or to those that are very close working around us. It doesn't have to be feeding the poor or, service like that.
Yeah, if you can do that, that's perfectly fine. But service is not a particular action. Service is a state of consciousness. Service is the state in which, there are people in life people are sitting at the banquet of life. And they are sitting and they expect life to come and serve them and bring them things. And a few people realize that this is a self-serving place. So they will stand up and go and get the food for all these people that are there thinking that they should be served. So at a certain point in evolution, we don't have the maturity to understand that we are the ones that have to serve, and we expect life to serve us. But we have to try to change that attitude from the idea that life should take care of me to the idea that I should take care of others. And that is a shift, that is an important shift in consciousness, and that is the idea of service. All right, so let us stop here. Is there any comment or question about it?
I just wanted to mention another religion that's Shinyoin. It's Japanese Buddhism, based on the last words of Buddha, which said that, I don't know where, but what they got from it was that the Buddha was present, omnipresent. And so they have brought up this idea of service, selfless service, and it's chanting is a major part of it. And because I go when they have different things on, it's just another thing to be part of. And what they say is, may the merit I have gained be given out to all sentient beings. They say that at the end of the day. And I thought it's a lovely reminder of to ourselves what we're doing.
Yes, all these reminders are important. Sometimes it is used after meditation, to offer the the fruits of the meditation. Those are all important reminders. We have to make sure that we know what we mean and that we mean what we are saying, and that I remember reading from Blavatsky, they were asking her about the pronunciation of Om, and Blavatsky says you have to pronounce Om in your daily actions. Whenever you are unselfish, then you are chanting Om. Whenever you are selfish, you are not. So all these are good reminders that is very useful to use, but let us make sure that we also do it in action and not just be happy with saying it, without really knowing what we mean. It's like the Bodhisattva vow. That's a very interesting vow. I want to attain liberation until all humanity attains liberation. But that implies many things in daily life. That means I'm not trying to be happier than the person next to me. So I'm not going to get the more comfortable chair. I'm not going to get the bigger piece of pie. And when we put it, we need to put all these things, what they really mean in daily life, and not keep it just as a thought. But beginning with the thought is important, and keep repeating the thought is important as a reminder.